Call to order the work session for the City of East Grand Forks for Tuesday, March 26, 2019 is now 5 o'clock. Would the City Clerk please call roll?
Mayor Steve Gander.
Here.
Council President Mark Holstead.
Here.
Council Vice President Chad Grassel. Council Members Clarence Vetter.
Here.
Dale Helms.
Here.
Tim Riopel.
Here.
Tim Johnson.
Here.
Mark Demers.
Present.
Does turn quorum. Number 1, consider request for war reenactment group. Thomas is here representing them.
Yes.
Kind of give us an overview of what you're looking for.
So I'm the district director for the Boy Scouts of America, and I'm also a Civil War reenactor with the 5th Minnesota Company D Civil War Group based out of Fort Abercrombie. And one of the things that we're looking at doing for our spring camporee for the Boy Scouts is a Civil War reenactment living history weekend. And part of that aspect would be to do some demonstrations with muskets and the cannon that they've produced. And so we just want to kind of bring it up to speed with the city here, so make sure we get permission to do the musket drills and demonstrations for the Boy Scouts and for the cannon.
Any questions on that, or Mary on that?
Where will you locate?
We'd be looking at the East Grand Forks Heritage Village,
Nice.
and we've already secured that location.
Thank you, Mr. President. Shooting the cannon like multiple times, or will there be, or do you know how?
Right now, just kind of set up as a demonstration, so there wouldn't be a lot of discharges of the cannon, maybe 1 or 2. But we can also work that if there's a certain amount that we're allowed, we can stay within that number as well.
I guess it's more of a notification thing, because I'm sure PD may, or 911 may get some calls, or, I mean, just so everybody knows what's going on. And then it's just kind of a life reenactment, or are you like reenacting a battle, or is it like?
It's more of the living history demonstration, so we're going to be taking the scouts through what the life of a soldier would be on a typical day of drill, firing demonstrations, what their life was like with medicine, food. We've actually be putting together a period baseball game for the scouts as well. So they're going to be kind of going through the life of what a typical soldier would be looking forward to in the 1860s.
And these are all the good guys, right?
Union troops.
There you go.
So.
Good job.
And how large an area will this serve?
For the Boy Scouts, it's primarily going to be the Lake Agassiz district, which goes all the way out to the east of Fosston and Warroad is our eastern border, and then our western border is Devil's Lake and Candu. But we are also working on promoting it with the Fergus Falls, Alexandria, and Fargo areas as well.
So what, Tim, do you have them, sir?
Is it open to the public?
Yes. Yep. All of our scouting functions are open to the public, so that is something that we can also publicize. So I don't think there's a huge, there's been anything done with the Civil War recently up here, so that'd be something that the public may be interested in seeing as well.
So as a city, what do we have to get approval on, or is it just permanent?
I think you guys are probably going to have to, and I'll double check with Ron, permit the shooting off of the guns, because right now you can't shoot anything off in town.
I don't see an issue with that because they're not shooting any projectiles. It's just basically noise, really similar to fireworks. So we would just allow or grant the ability to do that.
And I want to make sure I get the right approval from them, so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we've been treating it like a fireworks display.
So,
Does New Ulm, I know they fire off their artillery every once in a while. Do they have a special permit for that, or do they just?
I wasn't aware that New Ulm did something like that. Are you aware of any other places that do something?
No, I've only been in this area for about 2 years, so I'm still learning.
so I guess, sorry.
Dale, you have something, sir?
Thank you. I think that they were out to Heritage a few years ago. I don't know if it was your group or not, but there were some people out there a few years ago that kind of done the same thing, and it really wasn't a lot of noise at that time either. I mean, it was, they basically just kind of, they set up a little camp type thing and whatever out there and just kind of show the kids and people how things were back then. And like Ron said, it's nothing really being fired or anything to speak of, so it's
Like
pretty.
during Heritage Days, when you do those shows and they shoot there.
Yeah.
Whistle
I think
on a
that's the other
threshing
thing, when
machine
you
would
ask
be
if it's
louder.
free to the public, I think it's free to the public if they buy a button to get in the Heritage. So,
Okay, so if we need anything else signed, I do have contact information for Dave.
Okay.
So if we need something from, I'll reach out to him first, and then we'll try and get something together for the next council meeting,
Okay.
which is next week.
Sounds great.
Okay?
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good luck. Number 2, update on, this is the Highway 220 corridor study. You want to give us, I know some people already went through this, I think last week and seen it, and other organizations this week. If you want to give a 3-4 review of what it is and go from there, and if anybody has any questions.
I'm here today with engineer Darren Lake, and he's the director for the District Number 2 for Minnesota DOT. He will be assisting us with the understanding of the engineering recommendations that are being proposed. So today what I would like to do is rather briefly introduce you all to what has been happening recently in our corridor. The idea behind this is to submit to you a number of alternatives and also to explain the analysis and the evaluation process that been supporting the overall analysis and the identification of some concepts that are important for a number of stakeholders in terms of the mobility, access to, ability for them to cross the streets, ability for them to make some turning movements, and the ability for them to accommodate agricultural equipment that is very common on the corridor. So a number of steps been taken to provide the engineers with some kind of initial screening opportunities. So what we've been doing is we've been analyzing intersection capacity around the corridor, the safety benefits of the proposed alternatives, the right-of-way needs in terms of there is the need for any construction, the cost and the economic viability of all of those that are being submitted for consideration. Important is for us to realize that these alternatives will be incorporated within the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and therefore for us to continue advancing them to further implementation. The alternatives that you will see today are these alternatives include intersections from nine streets as far as 140 on the 220 North Corridor. Those are in 4 kind of types. They indicate access and traffic control devices considerations, access management, traffic signal, and pedestrian improvement strategies. So in one of the packages that you receive, you can see them outlined and see each one of them, including the pros and cons in each one of them, and also highlights each one of the objectives that the proposed strategy is trying to address. So this is my brief introduction, and now I will leave you with Engineer Darren Lesh. So you may continue.
Good evening. I'm Darren Lash. I'm the Planning Director for the Northwest District for MNDOT. I guess today I'd just like to give kind of a little bit of the why, kind of some of the findings that we discovered during the study, and then go over in detail a little bit more the preferred fixes that were identified, and kind of our timeline that we'd look at constructing those. So I'll try to be as quick as possible. I don't know if I'll stay within 2 minutes, but
Can you check to make sure your mic's on, too?
Is it flipped up?
it should be up,
Yep.
right? But, kind of first the why, and this really kind of came out of, a few years ago we did the Business 2 study, Business 2 and US 2, and it was kind of identified and talked about, well, why aren't you looking at 2 and 220? That's where the problems are, and that's been identified a number of times, and it's in our safety plan. It's always at one of the top intersections in our safety plan. And we didn't have a real good solution for what to do there. And so we thought this study could really help guide us on what improvements we can make. The other kind of critical intersection that we need to make some improvements on soon is 14th Street. That signal, some of the wiring and the conduit under the pavement is in very poor condition, and if we have any problems with that wiring, we really can't fix it in the interim. So we need to make we need to replace that signal system very soon. And before we replace it, we want to make sure that that's the correct fix, that that's the long-term vision for that intersection. So those are kind of the two driving forces to why MNDOT wanted to move ahead with the study. Kind of as we started investigating this corridor, we did confirm, 2 and 220, that's a bad intersection. 49 crashes in a 5-year period, well above what you would expect to see on a corridor, on an intersection with those volumes, with that makeup of a signal and lane configuration. So we did, document that. I think something that kind of surprised us was at 17th Street. That was another intersection that some safety concerns were brought up, that there were 13 crashes in that location, and with your volumes go down quite a bit as you go north, and just comparing intersections with that type of volume that are unsignalized, that is above kind of what we'd expect to see on an average. So that was identified as a critical crash location. So I guess in general, we studied, from 9th all the way up to, was it 140th? There's 111 crashes that have happened over that 5-year period that we studied. 99 of them were at intersections, so most of them are happening at those key intersections, but definitely higher than what we'd like to see. So that was a key point. Jairo kind of mentioned, some of the PED needs. I think that was also something that kind of got brought forward, was that 17th Street there's a higher need for pedestrian safety at that intersection. That you got the 2 schools, you got the tech school, you got people living on both sides of the highway there that are needing to cross, and it's not really reasonable to expect everyone to go all the way down to 14th and cross. And that's just a really wide corridor for anyone to cross and feel comfortable. So that was brought forward. Looking at operations, one of the questions we had going into this was, where do you need 4-lane, and where can you go down to 2-lane? And so the study kind of identified that 17th Street is kind of the cutoff, that we do need 4-lane from US 2 up to 17th Street. As you go north of 17th Street, your volumes drop off quite a bit. And even looking at future projections there, as you can see that graph, kind of the furthest to the right is the projected volumes for each of the corridors, and I know that's hard to read. But we see north of 17th adequate level of service with a 2-lane with turn lanes, and between that 2 to 17th you need the 4-lane configuration to work. We also identified that US 2 220, you're going to start seeing more and more delay as volumes increase. Right now average delay is about 20 seconds, and this study identified that delay would increase to about 50 seconds by 2045. So that's a significant increase. It's still kind of within our tolerance, but you're kind of getting borderline there, and it's probably not an intersection that you commonly see in this area of that kind of delay. And then 17th and 23rd, as you get closer to that 2045 timeline, you're also going to see a lot of delay on those side streets. And so, looking at, we always look at signal warrants to justify whether a signal is needed there. And those, as you get to 2045, they're approaching that point when you need to make some type of traffic control change just to keep traffic flowing and minimize that delay on the side streets. So those are kind of the high-level issues that were identified with the corridor study. This is just kind of a rough outline of the area that we looked at, and I kind of zoomed in. I'm going to focus most of my attention from US 2 out to 23rd. That's where I see the bulk of the changes that are recommended. And so, as Jairo mentioned, we looked at signals, we looked at roundabout, we looked at some different geometric changes, especially at 2 and 220, and a few tweaks at 20th and 15th. Kind of the preferred look here at 2 and 220, the roundabout would have to be a 2x2 roundabout with 4 lanes coming in on all sides. Comparing that with some of the roundabouts we've done across the state like that, you generally see a lot of crashes still. You get your serious crashes down, but you'd probably see your crash number go up. So we kind of ruled that out pretty early in the process for a roundabout at that location. And then that kind of led us to some different signal configurations and some geometric changes. As you go over to 14th, we looked at a roundabout at that one as well. And just with that has to be, again, it's 4 lanes on the north and south leg there. It's a 2x1 roundabout. You still need a pretty large diameter, and with the frontage roads, proximity to the highway, it really wasn't feasible to fit a roundabout in that location. So the study's kind of identified that a signal still needs to remain at 14. As you go up to 17th and 23rd, that's where we kind of make that switch from a 4-lane facility to a 2-lane facility. And single-lane roundabouts have a lot of advantages with, you see a significant crash reduction, and you also see some operational benefits. When you compare putting a signal at 17th and 23rd compared to the roundabout, you see significant delay reduction in the roundabout, where when you put a signal in, you're seeing more delay ultimately than you have today. So there's some real advantages to that roundabout. I'm going to go over these in a little bit more detail here for each intersection. So looking at the 2 and 220, we're looking at mainly some minor tweaks to this. Looking at offset left turn lanes at the center there, which is probably going to mean some widening. That just provides some better sight lines, and I guess there's going to be less interaction there with the left turning movements. We also looked at kind of adding flashing yellow arrows in the permissive movement instead of a green ball. That's basically, that's a yield left turn movement at a signal, but we found that there are some safety benefits to that, and it does give you the option then to have, at times, it's a protected left turning movement where you get the green arrow and the red arrow, and then at other times you get the flashing yellow. So you see some safety benefits with that. And then the other big concern at this intersection is those free rights. And kind of looking at the northwest and the southeast quadrant there, those free rights can be a challenge because sightline wise, you're cranking your head way back to see those vehicles. There's really not an acceleration lane there, so you got to make that quick merge. So you either get people trying to squeeze into a gap that's too tight, or you get someone slamming on their brakes and the person behind them's doing this, and you get the rear ends. So we're looking at in those two quadrants that we would eliminate that. It has a minor impact on operations, but we feel that the safety benefit's important. On the other two corners, we really couldn't do that because of the skew at the intersection. Trucks couldn't make that turning movement without the free right, so those will remain, but I don't think those are as problematic. So in a nutshell, we're hoping for about a 30% reduction in crashes. Still not certain if we got the right answer here, but other than looking at more along Highway 2, some major improvements, and I think this is kind of the next step, and hopefully we get that 30% reduction, and that would kind of put us into more of that average that we'd see in other communities. Looking at 14th, that one's going to stay very similar. One of the big advantages to this one and 2 and 220 is if we update those signals, they can all be interconnected, so the signals are talking to one another. That'll just improve flow of traffic and kind of move those queues through so there's less stop and go, less chance for a rear end. That's where you see the majority of your crashes are rear ends at these signalized intersections. So not a lot of other changes at this intersection. Moving up to 17th, this is where we got, I guess, a lot more discussion probably that we've had so far on 17th, and really what I'm showing here is kind of an interim solution. Kind of, as I look at north of 14th there, this isn't kind of a short-term need in our opinion. The pavement's in pretty good shape. There wasn't anything that jumped out that said we need to get into these intersections and get them improved immediately. So we're kind of looking at allowing that pavement to degrade, and these intersection improvements will probably happen at a later date. But we did hear, that there was that pedestrian crossing need at 17th. So this is kind of the interim solution that we felt maybe we could deliver this with the 14th and the 2 and 220 improvements, is adding some bump outs. So kind of eating up that shoulder space there to shorten that distance that the pedestrian is out in the travel lanes, and then potentially adding a median refuge there just to provide a safe area for pedestrians and enhance the crosswalk markings and signage. So that's kind of just a quick interim solution. This is kind of the preferred solution for long-term, would be a roundabout at this intersection. Single lane roundabout, and we're looking at a 55% crash reduction with this roundabout, and operational improvements. Overall, there'd be less delay with a roundabout here than as is today, because of the side street traffic would be able to get out into the intersection a lot quicker. And the other benefit to the roundabout is if you look at the pedestrian crossing distance, you're really tightening that up. You don't have, if you go back to this example, they still, even with pushing out those bump outs, they're still crossing 6 lanes of traffic. Where if you go to the roundabout, you're crossing 2 lanes of traffic, and you're doing that in 2-stage movements. So that pedestrian has, basically needs to cross about 16, 20 feet of pavement. They got a refuge, and they can cross another 16, 20 feet of pavement. We feel that's a much safer and much more comfortable place for a pedestrian to be. You also, with the roundabout, that forces traffic to slow down about 15 miles an hour. If you look at the difference with the crash at 15 miles an hour compared to 30 miles an hour, your chances of walking away at a 30 mile an hour crash are much higher than much lower than at a 15 mile an hour crash. So you see some significant pedestrian safety benefits with the roundabout. There are some negatives here with the roundabout, and it all kind of hinges with these frontage roads being so close. We were kind of looking at some different options, and we're kind of leaning towards this option of sliding the roundabout to the east so we can keep that frontage road on the west side open. So you can still go north-south through there. A car can still make all the movements on the west side there. A truck heading south would not be able to make the left turn movement out into the roundabout. So trucks would have to head north and get back out on the Highway 220 at 20th Street, which we would leave as is. More major impacts. On the right side there, you'd have a median across that frontage road, and so that's going to change how people utilize the frontage roads. You're now kind of coming in one direction and coming out the other direction. So there is a little bit of extra backtracking. You can get everywhere, but yeah, you're kind of restricted. If you want to get into the businesses in that southeast quadrant, you come through the roundabout and head south. If you want to get to the businesses in the northeast quadrant, you got to go up to 20th and come back down. So that would be a change, and yeah, it's not ideal. I guess the other option that we decided not to look at because it would be a big change is eliminating the frontage roads as a whole. But there are a lot of advantages to kind of managing accesses and getting those onto the frontage roads. So we feel that this is a nice compromise. I'll just touch base on, I guess here's some of the truck turning movements. So pretty much we looked at a truck with a wheelbase of 67 feet. That's a 53-foot trailer. That's kind of our design vehicle for all our highway projects. And pretty much a truck can make all the movements within the roundabout. And really the only restriction for a truck that size is that southbound truck on the west frontage road that wants to get out into the roundabout. They're going to have to head north. And then at 23rd Street, the preferred alternative, again, is a roundabout. This one works a little bit better because the frontage roads kind of bell out. So you have that separation, so you're not changing any kind of operations with the frontage roads. Once again, you get that big safety benefit. And this is kind of an area where we really have a lot of struggles putting a signal. Because you got kind of those higher speeds coming in, and you see a lot of, with that signal there, all it takes is one person running a red light at 60 miles an hour, and somebody's going to get killed there. And we see that in a lot of communities where you got that first signal coming in, can be real problematic. So we really like to see a roundabout at this point. It's kind of that gateway into town. It's kind of that cue to tell people you're coming into an urban area. It gets them slowing down. You got to go 15 miles an hour through the roundabout. Then it's comfortable to drive 30 as you go through the rest of the corridor there. So we see some real benefits there to making this a much safer urban corridor for anyone walking, biking, or driving. So I guess with that, I just included this aerial here if there's any kind of questions on operations, but on 17th, so basically this movement for trucks, am I at the right spot? Yeah. That movement for trucks, they'd have to come back to 20th and get back onto 220 there. And then this movement here, anybody that's coming from this, let's see, if you're heading out of businesses here, you're going to have to head down to 15th to get out. If you want to get to these businesses, you got to go around to 20th and access there, and then you can get back out. So you can access everything, but there is some additional drive time there to get around. So with that, I think I'll open the floor to questions.
Questions? Mark?
Thank you, Mr. President. Darren, on the 2 and 220 options or alternatives that are mentioned, the east-west offset option that you presented as the best case, I noticed that there's no alternative for offset for the north-south left turn movements. Is that because of cost, or is it supported by traffic or like crash data, or is it just because of the space, particularly on the south side of that intersection?
I don't have a good answer for you on that. I'd have
Okay.
to check with our consultant with Alliant and
It just seems like
see why they didn't.
there's as
do that.
much problem for the same reasons with left turns going north and
Yeah.
south onto east and west as you would.
Yeah, and it may just be I don't know if we have space to widen out that direction.
Right. I guess I do like the option for the offset lefts. I think from what I've seen, it does help. You know, you see all the time, and you probably see it a lot because you're up on that end, but you know, those people that are constantly creeping out as we get bigger and bigger vehicles and stuff, and you can't see behind them going left or whatever, especially at those skewed intersection. So if there's, I would take it back to the consultant to see. I mean, that would be one question to ask is there any way, I mean, I could imagine that especially on the south side, you might have to acquire some property or some right of way or something, but if it's going to make it safer, that would be the preferred, you know.
Yeah, I do think there's probably a lower amount of left turning movements going north-south there. And I think he's probably looking at, you know, this space here is pretty tight.
I'd say
So
there's
it's
probably
to
just as
widen that
many
area.
going north that are coming from north or south, because those are all the people coming into, I mean, those same people that are coming from 220 and going home or whatever at the end of the day are the same people are going the opposite way in the morning. I mean,
Yeah, the predominant movement is this left and then this right. So kind of looking, and I don't think a lot of folks are making this left. And then as far as this left, I'd say that'd probably be a lower movement as well. So that, but we'll check on that and we'll get a response back.
right.
Yeah, let me clean it up here.
That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Your proposal on 220 coming into town with a roundabout at 23rd, you're coming in on a 2-lane and you're exiting on 4-lane on your roundabout.
23rd here.
Correct.
Kind of
You're coming in from 220 north, you'd be heading south, coming into town, that's 2-lane. Then you're going to hit your roundabout and you're going to come in out on a 4-lane.
Cutting it down. Just cut it down.
Yeah, what we're proposing is that it'll be 2-lane all the way down to 17th. But
It is 2-lane now.
Yeah.
yeah,
From 23rd to 17th. Yep.
yeah, there's kind of a gray area there between 17th and 20th where it switches over. So I guess what is your question? Or-
Well, I can see how it would work on that, but not on 17th. On 4-lane, when you got you got 4-lane and you got 2 rows there. People have a hard enough time turning left on Demers and Grand Forks with 2-lane. I couldn't imagine a roundabout with 2 lanes. Do they have that anywhere in the state?
That's what, the only 2-lane is kind of that incoming
I mean,
2-lane.
4 lanes. We're coming out of 4 lanes, correct, on this roundabout on 17th?
No.
Turns to
The
2-lane.
roundabout will be all single
side.
lane. It'll widen, it'll neck out here kind of as you head south. You will have 2 lanes coming up to the roundabout.
Right.
The outside lane will go through. The inside lane will allow you to make that left.
And between 17th and 20th, they're proposing to cut it down to 2 lanes.
Yeah. Pretty much it is.
Explain the reason for the road diet.
Answer your question?
I've never seen it in the state. I've seen it in Bemidji where they've got roundabouts that work with single lanes, but I've never seen it doubled, coming out of it.
Dale?
Mr. President. Darren, I'm just a little bit confused here, because last Tuesday at our meeting, everybody that was here kind of left with the idea that you had dropped the roundabouts on 220 because they weren't going to be feasible out there with all the businesses out there and all the truck traffic that gets out that way. And the farm equipment coming through there, and even if it's a 4-lane roundabout, I'll guarantee you that them trucks are going to be on those curbs. The other problem I can see is snow removal. I mean, it's going to be impossible to get all that snow out of those roads out there if we get storms like we just had. It took them 3 days to get 23rd opened up after that last storm. I mean, I might be exaggerating a little bit, but it took a long time. So I think if you start putting all these dividers and everything in this road, I don't see snow getting cleaned out of there very easily. I have a problem with the fact that you have to go all the way down to the next street just to get to your own business. We discussed that pretty heartily last Tuesday, and so I'm a little confused that you're coming back now with these proposals on these roundabouts, because you'd pretty much had told us at that time that you didn't see that they would work at this particular time.
I guess I didn't touch base on, what we talked about was the timeline. I think that's kind of where we left it, was that the timeline for these roundabouts is probably 15 years out. But we do feel that this is our preferred long-term solution. We don't feel that signals at 17th and 23rd are something we would entertain long-term wise. And so we'd much rather see this identified as a long-term solution. And so that's kind of where we left the last meeting, was that we're not going to be pushing this. This will be, when we get to the time that a roundabout or a signal is needed, and we'll be working with the city, and it'll have to be a cooperative project. So the city's going to have to be on board, or we just don't have a project here. So I guess for planning purposes, we do need to have kind of a long-term plan. We did invest in this so that we would have a vision, and everything in this study is saying that signals have a negative effect on safety and a negative effect on operations, and the roundabouts do the opposite here at these two intersections. And so we feel that that is the correct long-term solution.
I think that's where I think we left on misunderstanding there, because I think we talked about the roundabouts, we talked about the stoplights, we talked about you changing and putting these dividers in and all this other stuff. And we did talk about the 15-year plan before anything was ever done, but I think we left with the understanding that you were going to be looking at street lights, probably, putting the dividers in there, whatever type of thing. But I think all of us left with the idea that you had pretty much had the roundabouts out of the question. So that's why I'm kind of confused. That's a misunderstanding there on that, I think.
We kind of ran out of time last Tuesday, so I never felt like we got a lot of closure in that meeting.
Yeah.
But
I think we had a very good discussion. I think we've had lots of very good discussions on this 220 corridor with the people we've had here and everything. And then last week we had, Steve Corcoran from Valley Truck was on that deal, and we had Randy Pecca here. And as we voiced our opinion that there isn't a business on 220 North that doesn't get a semi-truck into that place sometime during the day. I mean, there's lots of them out there. So it's something we need to really look at real hard. And then the fact of this farm equipment is 25 feet wide folded up anymore, So it's really and that is the main corridor for farm equipment right there, 220 North. And I just think that's going to be a big concern with that. Especially being it's only 2-lane out there, So anyway, thank you.
Just so the council understands also, any improvements that would have to be made to the frontage road, 17th on the east or west side, correct me if I'm wrong, Darren, but those would be city costs, correct?
Yeah, that's a good point to make as well, that, as I said, this is, any intersection project is a cooperative project with the with whoever has the local leg jurisdiction. So yeah, as Steve pointed out, they say we can cover the circle and any kind of improvements on the north-south, but any kind of improvements over here and here would be a local cost. And so, yeah, that's something that we would look to work with the city on, you know, we can't move forward without coming to some agreement with you guys on that. And basically, I think kind of where we're at is, I guess we have that interim solution for the pedestrian crossing. We feel that this is the correct long-term solution. We're really not entertaining a signal system here. And so, you know, kind of it's either leave as is or you know, if we do want to make some operational and safety improvements, this is kind of the direction we would highly recommend. And I'd probably leave it up to the city at that point. When we get into that 2030 timeframe, do you want that type of investment? And if not, we can make those investments in other communities, and that's okay. It's actually, I mean, all in all, that's a pretty good highway system, you know. So I think if we can address the 2 and 220 safety concerns, that's kind of our biggest priority right now.
I think we could address some of that speed limit stuff just by putting up those solar-powered flashing speed limit signs that they put all over the place. That thing's flashing at you. I know I'm guilty of it. If I'm driving along, that thing starts flashing at me. I'm looking.
Yeah.
Are you slowing down?
I am.
See how fast you can go.
And that's something, yeah, I guess cities are responsible for putting those in and maintaining those. We can kind of help out, spec it out and things like that, but that's it's not something MNDOT is putting in any of the communities. The ones that you see, the city sponsored them.
Maybe that's something we should be looking at with the police department and talking about putting those in out there, because when they come in 220, they do come in pretty fast. I mean, we see it every day. And maybe one of those sitting out there wouldn't be a bad idea, you know, put along on the berm there or whatever, you know, and because they do work. You got one out on a point, I think, isn't there?
Yes.
So, anyway, okay.
Very good.
I'd like to go back to how this all started. Jairo and I have had conversations about the Highway 220 North corridor as it comes into Highway 2, and Jairo and I agreed that, you know, sometimes we come with some theoretical kinds of solutions that may not be workable to the local residents. So Jairo, Megan, and I went to work identifying individual businesses affected along that corridor with the hope that we could address, number one, the unacceptably high crash rates, number two, to create better pedestrian safety, but number three, to have it also be common sense oriented to not adversely affect the businesses in there. And I maybe was out of place, but in the first meeting, I sat down with you and Steve Corcoran and the other business leaders, and I said, do not be afraid to butt heads with MNDOT. You know, that's how we're going to get to a common sense solution, and I say that with the deepest respect. You have a great view of this from a standpoint of strategies of traffic, and you have the whole statewide and national view, international probably, and yet we have our local objectives that we want to accomplish as well. And to find that balance, I do want to thank the folks who served on there, and you're still butting heads just a little bit saying, whoa, where'd these roundabouts come from? And I think that's how you get a good process. If this thing is going to be actionable at all, it's going to have to conform to your theories and to your common sense. It's going to have to conform to all of that if it's actionable at all.
Mr. Demers.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned 15-year timeline for the roundabout type, maybe roundabout intersection controls at 17th, 23rd. What's the timeline for the 2 and 220? Same?
I would say about 5 year.
5 year.
We're looking at some signal improvements at Business 2, and I'm kind of looking at maybe trying to tie all that together into one project where we upgrade. Most of the signals in East Grand are kind of aging out, so kind of tie that together. But I guess the other, you know, when we look at widening out Highway 2 for the offset left turn lanes. The other opportunity of tying that is with when we do the 4th Street Bridge. There may be some advantages to doing it that time frame. So, but I would say in that 5 to 10 year window is kind of where we're targeting those.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else have any more questions?
Just wanted to know when what your 5-year study, when was it?
The crash period?
Right.
We had to go from 2011 to 2015. There's some data issues with 16 to 18 that we had to kind of throw those out. They kind of changed how they record the data, and so you get kind of some goofy results when you fill those in. So we did have to go back a couple of years.
Thank you.
Yep, appreciate you coming in, both of you. Harlow, you have something?
Just a final comment. This is related to the handout that we provided to you, is to indicate that those are proposed strategies. Each one of them has been given the benefits and the cost. It's given you the pros and the cons, and it's already known by both implementing agencies, MNDOT and the cities, to what extent each one of them can go when it comes to financing. Because some of those in the intersections, there are some legs on the intersections that belongs to the jurisdiction of MNDOT, and there are some portions also of the right-of-way that are under the city's control. So all of those elements being considered for the proposals of these alternatives. Now, the study has not been finalized. The community, stakeholders and decision makers still have the opportunity to improve by bringing your comments, your concerns, and insights to see, to test the viability of each one of those strategies that are being proposed. So again, the MPO invites everybody here, each one of you, to make sure that you bring your comments either to the MPO director or straight to the DOT or to the city staff, so then they are incorporated in the final recommendations in the study.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I guess the last thing I'd just like to say is we're going to build 3 roundabouts in Thief River on Highway 59 in 2020. And I think that'll really shed some light on how well they work with trucks and with maintenance, and something that we'll all probably be using. So I guess I think that'll help a lot in the next 5 years. We're going to build a lot more roundabouts on our trunk highway system, and we'll see how they perform, where they work and where they don't work, and go
Don't
from
have a
there.
trouble with roundabouts in the right places.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, move on to number 3, consider extensions in Minnesota public facilities for loan disbursement. Mr. Murphy.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I promise this will only take slightly longer than this last agenda item.
Perfect.
Next agenda.
All right, no, this one should be fairly quick. I really debated bringing this forward even, or just putting it on the consent agenda, but what this is just want to give some background. This is for the wastewater pond decommissioning. Again, that the timeline for the final disbursements would be for work to have incurred by June 30th, 2019. What we're looking at is potential there could go out beyond that. It could be kind of tight. So we spoke with the Minnesota PFA. They agreed to extend that for a year just to make sure that everything would be in the timeline. It doesn't change anything as far as costs or any of that, but just wanted to make sure that the council was aware of that, and we'll put that on for action at the next meeting.
Thanks, sir. Number 4, request for bids to remodel office and police department. Chief Hedlund.
Thank you, Mr. President. This particular project was in the final budget for 2019, so we had a brief description of it in that particular presentation. Basically, what we're looking to do is take our existing conference room and turn that into 2 offices, and then an area that is currently used by one of our admin assistants as essentially her office, but it's an open area with 2 hallways running along the side of it, and turning that into a new conference room. This would benefit us in a number of different ways. The primary ones was that particular admin assistant, one of her duties is doing transcriptions of interviews, recordings from, both suspect tapes, things like that. Very difficult for her to do them effectively when she's constantly got people walking by her office, which, sometimes it's relatively quiet, other times there's people going back and forth like crazy, depending on the time of the day and the events that are going on. Would be much easier for her to be able to get her job done and more effectively if she's actually at an office. We also, kind of the day-to-day operations of our department has changed a little bit over the last few years as we've become one of the members of the Pine to Prairie Drug Task Force. We currently have 2 Border Patrol officers that work out of our office. They're presently sharing an office with 2 of our sergeants. Those sergeants work opposite shifts, so there's never all 4 of them working, but there are a number of times where you've got 3 officers trying to work out of the same relatively small office. This would allow us to have those 2 Border Patrol officers move into one of those offices. So at least there'd still be 2 of them in an office, so it would be certainly better than 3 people having to work out of the same office. It would also allow us to have a slightly larger conference room. Not a huge benefit. We can certainly get by with our existing office. The main benefit is by the addition of those 2 offices. So, any questions for anyone?
Anybody have any questions for Chief Hedlund at this time?
We don't lease that to the Border Patrol, though, do we?
We do not, no.
Just let them use it,
Yes.
part of the force?
They're a member of the Drug Task Force where they have not gained, they basically provide all of their own funding. They don't accept any of the money from the grant. To this point, any of the forfeiture funds, none of them have gone to them. That's all been maintained within the local agencies within the program, or the task force. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Number 5, request for social media consulting, Mr. Gordy.
Last year, we adopted the marketing communications plan. One of the recommendations in that plan was to increase the social media presence. To that end, the EDA now has a web page, or a Facebook page. Because I don't deal with social media very much, I talk with the EDA, and I propose that we use the EDA to consult, that we use AE2S to consult with on a social media strategy. We would do the implementation, but we would talk with them. I proposed to do that 4 to 6 times per year. The EDA came back and told me that I should be meeting with them at least once a month because of the need to do this on a timely basis. Social media has an immediacy aspect to it. So they have recommended that we approve this. Total cost, anticipated cost for an annual basis for this is under $1,100. We have budgeted for that. So I ask that the council also approve this.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Gordy? Mr. Gelston?
The only comment that I had, and we talked about this the other day, is there was going to be a couple of modifications. Governing law should be the state of Minnesota. And then we previously had a document that we modified regarding the limits of liability in paragraph 7 and damages in 6. And I recommend modifying that again and getting approval for those changes.
And AE2S agreed to those changes last time, as soon as we asked for them.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, sir. Anybody else have any? See none, sir. Thank you so much. Update on flood preparations. Chief Larson, Mr. Stordahl.
Better move over.
Hot seats are going.
Sure, I can start in. We've had a meeting here recently talking about flood preparation, and they're meeting every single day, these individuals, all of them involved in flood protection. And of course, it's a dynamic situation as for what the weather's going to do and how high the crest will be and when the crest will take place. And I can just give you, first of all, some information that we have here as to sandbags available March 22nd. We've had some requests from community members on sandbags. The City of East Grand Forks will have sandbags available to residents of the city. Residents will be responsible to get sand, load and place the sandbags. They'll also be responsible to dispose of the sandbags when done using them. Residents will be allowed 250 sandbags per resident. To get sandbags, we have the flood hotline, 218-399-3456 here in East Grand Forks. And at the county, they have sandbags available in a similar fashion, 218-470-8290. We do have individual contractors with sand available. Shane's Landscaping will do sand and delivery. And please, by all means, call Megan at the city. She'll have details about that. Portamix will provide sand only, so you'd have to transport it yourself. Pekka Excavating, sand and delivery. And K&K Trucking, only semi-loads of 20 yards. So those are the contractors that we have available to bring sand if you need it. Or in the case of Portamix, you'd pick it up yourself.
Can I ask a question on that right in there? Can we make sure that the citizens know that the sand is not, is it free or is it cost to them? Because it's not, I want to make
Citizens
sure
pay, so they'll arrange for all of that on their own.
I just want to make sure that's out there that they are responsible for that.
The sand and the delivery cost.
And those companies are not providing it for free.
Correct.
Yep, we can make sure.
Good. So Polk County residents needing sandbags will be using the same policy as East Grand Forks. Contact numbers for Polk County, we have those also available. So if you are outside the city limits and need sandbags, there is provision for that. And then a March 25th update, 2019 flood update. The City of East Grand Forks has been preparing for the flood level of 50.6 feet. That is the latest crest prediction that we have. We have crews that have checked all the gates and pumps in the flood system. Crews that install the flood wall have met and are ready to build the flood closures. Most of the work to be completed is going to be completed by city employees. The flood hotline is up and running. Once again, that number 218-399-3456. Please call with any flood-related questions. There's a long link here for river levels and the crest prediction currently with percentages. And once again, if you need that, you can talk to Megan, and she'd be a good contact for that. And updates to flood protection you can see on the website, which is flood, FLOOD.EGF.MN. And I am serving as the Public Information Officer, and so they'll keep me up to date. They'll be giving me all sorts of updates, probably several a day as the water starts to rise, and I'm happy to serve in that capacity. We also thought that residents should know as a courtesy kind of what is our sequence of road closures and other development and building of these temporary structures, which we would call the invisible flood wall, the stem wall. So please keep in mind that pretty early on in the effort, and we're not going to try to pinpoint it to exactly foot elevations. It's going to be all about rate of rise, has it crested in Fargo or not. So we can't be locked into on this foot we do that and on this foot we do that. But generally we should be aware that pretty early on in the process, the stem wall or invisible flood wall near Cabela's and in front of the restaurant row will be installed, and the Demers closure will be left open. And next we will remove the railings from the pedestrian bridge, and that means that the bridge would be closed at that point. And that's going to happen fairly early on because you have to allow for the flowage up and over that without taking those railings off. And then soon after that, the down ramp from Highway 2 to 4th Street will close due to water coming up the catch basin. Soon thereafter, 4th Street River Road underpass will close, and that's at about 41 to 42 feet, plus or minus. Flood wall closures at River Road and 17th. By all accounts, we're going to hit that, so anticipate that the flood wall closures at River Road and 17th will be in place. And then we're going to go to 12th shortly thereafter, and then it will go to Demers Avenue closure. And somewhere in there is when the Minnesota Avenue Bridge in the mid-40s will also be closed. And then it keeps going on from there. We'll have to see just how much of a rise we're going to get. And all of that, of course, I think, as Jason has indicated also, we're going to get a better idea when you get some clean flows coming through as to what really is the potential for significant flooding. We'll know a lot more even in the next few days as you can get a better read on these rates of rise at points up and down the river. And again, I'm so proud of all of our people, from the safety part of it to the actual building and maintaining of all the structures. I'm sure you'll be keenly involved in all of it as well. It's really amazing to think what a change in a flood fight that's conducted pretty much by our city staff versus closing our schools for 2 weeks, taking our kids out of school, closing our businesses, trying to fight flood with sandbags. This is pretty ridiculous, the quality of flood protection that we have from this flood control system and from the quality of work that we get from our city staff.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Stordahl, do you have something to add? Chief Larson?
I guess, as the mayor kind of hit on a little bit, hopefully we'll get some more guidance here shortly. National Weather Service up to this point has only given us outlooks, not predictions. So the 50.6 is an outlook. We're having some decent weather for melting right now. We're having cool evenings and, you know, decent temperatures in the day. When the sun comes out, it seems to be melting fairly well. The fields are opening up a little bit. You're seeing more black. There's water in some of the ditches. River's looking a little bit wet around the edges right now. And once there's a flow in the river, the Weather Service will start doing their predictions. And then from that point on, we'll have a better idea of what the crest might be. And we'll just be monitoring day by day and hour by hour and making decisions on closures as that happens. So also working closely with Grand Forks on the Demers closure, on the Point Bridge closure. And we've been meeting with them. I guess we met with them last week. We'll meet with them again coming up this Friday. And as far as staff goes, I've been meeting with Chief Larson each week as well as staff. We've had a couple meetings that were a little bit larger with Brad Bale and Steve Emery. Again, just discussing which closures are going to go up first and kind of a timeline on that. So.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah, other than that, we did meet with all patrons along the boardwalk and explained to them that more than likely the closure would be going up. They were all good with it, so there was no problems there that we know of. Corey is working on a new website for us that we can better get the information out and updates on everything on the floods. So we saw a couple preliminary ones of that, and that should be up within a day or two. So he's done a nice job with that. They mentioned today about certifying the walls and closures. That's something we're going to try and deal with as the walls go up, make sure we meet the criteria, and then Brad has had the classes he needs to certify that. So that's supposed to be done every 5 years. So we are working on a list of people, if it ever does get into bagging, that can help elderly or whatever, will donate their time. And we've met with a couple residents and that felt they needed a bag, and kind of told them we really didn't feel they needed to, but it's available if they want to. So that would be about it for.
May I interrupt just one thing? Chief Larson, do you want to just elaborate a bit on the certification for the flood walls, that there could be the potential that some of those the invisible walls might go up just to be certified, even if they might not be needed for the flood?
On installing the ones that are maybe not needed?
Yes.
Yeah, Brad enlightened us a little bit today. He said we don't have to build them to the top in order for them to be certified. Okay. They're really concerned mainly with the bottom seal where they're leaking and so on. So that changes a little bit, allows the guys that are building the walls to make that decision on, you know, what height we want to go to. So if the stem wall is at 52 feet, you know, maybe we will not have to build it all the way up. It just depends so much on rains and weather from here, and it's hard to think about when we're still at 16.6 feet that we're going to be dealing with huge amounts of water, but we've all seen it before, so.
Appreciate it, thank you so much. Anybody else have any questions on that? Not? Okay, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Moved by Utah, second by Johnson, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. 5 minutes.